Hello, everybody. Welcome to the CG Cookie live stream. I'm Kent Trammell, and I've got Jonathan Lampel with me today. And we are on the second episode of the May Critiques, where we're looking at your artwork and roasting it, as Thibaut put it early on in the chat. And speaking of the chat, it's been quite an interesting conversation about the philosophy of critique and improvement. We were talking a lot about the movie Whiplash. So anyway, you've genuinely got me very distracted thinking about all that stuff. So part of me wants to just rake you all over the coals, say nothing positive about you today or your work, so that we can get to greatness. But I'm not actually going to be able to stomach that approach. So, but very good, lively conversation. And also about the site, like that became a conversation too. And I am going to try and, talk to Wes. Maybe we can do an Ask Me Anything sort of stream, even get Nick involved since he's our developer. And Lampel, you spend a decent amount of time with the web dev design kind of conversations. So maybe we can, talk that out together. It would be really interesting to just, see where you're coming from, how you're approaching the site, and, how we're approaching it. So anyway, yeah, that's kind of a different rabbit hole. But today, we're talking about critiques. And let's see, let me start over my presentation at the beginning. Yeah, Blender Art Critiques episode 2 of the month of May 2018. So let's get started with Thibaut Bourbon. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. Maybe give me a thumbs up in the chat if I am. But you have a couple ArcViz renders, which are quite good, if I say so myself. There's it's a level of quality that's causing me, and I assume Lampel, to kind of dive in and really nitpick this thing. So I hope you are 10 out of 10 on the pronunciation. Awesome. I hope you're okay with the nitpicking because it is very good. You clearly are progressing, and we've seen your work progress since you've been part of CG Cookie, and I mean, you're like a rocket. So keep up the great work. That being said, we are ready to nitpick it. And let me first, I want to try and get in the habit of reading the context that you guys post in the threads. Let me read that. Let's see.
It's a good idea.
Let's see, I've been struggling with how to find a good balance with surface imperfections, stains, and so on. Usually in architecture magazines and real estate web pages, it's almost pristine, yet not without imperfection. That subtleness is tricky to reach, I find. Any advice on the composition as well? That's awesome. That actually, I haven't read that for a while, but and I gave my notes that actually go right into those points. So seems like we're going to be on the same page. And yeah, I mean, the first thing that sticks out to me is the couch, because it's the only thing in the scene that doesn't look pristine. And there's these very large wear. It kind of looks like a dirty vertex color situation. And it provides a lot of wear to the style of leather. And compared to the perfection of everything else, it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb to me. Also, the details in the wrinkle of the leather is a little broad. I feel like it can be on a smaller scale, finer wrinkles, and so that couch in the middle sticks out to me as a potentially problematic area. But to your point about like going pristine or not, or how to implement subtle imperfections, I think that is the ArcViz artist's probably biggest struggle. Would you agree with that? You do more of that stuff than me, Lampel.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Do you have any notes like
find that right balance?
Yeah. Do you have any like notes about well, actually you have an image, I think. Let me see. Those are the notes. We'll come back to those. So yeah, you posted this image of comparing two couches, a photo compared to Thibaut's.
Compared to the render? Yeah. So it was super helpful that he provided a render of just the couch, because now we can compare it directly.
Yeah. And by the way, real quick, that is on his website. So check that out. thibaut.brrendering.com. That's where we got that, but little plug. All right, go ahead.
Oh yeah. So the thing that like immediately stands out first is like the scale of the leather bump texture. That's probably a bit too big. But beyond that, like basically exactly like you said. All of the details seem very broad,
Mhm.
where in the photo, a lot of the wrinkles are quite small and they're really attached to the seams, where they're kind of like there's so much stuffing in there that it's like bursting out.
Yeah.
But on the top part of the couch on the render, it's sort of like a very square shape and then like a couple bumps
Mhm.
that don't really go in towards the seam. So it's like kind of has to like fluff out a little bit.
Yeah. It's a good point. It doesn't quite feel like a cloth enclosure that's stuffed with a bunch of whatever couches are made of, fluffy
Yeah, it looks like
business.
it's more stuff with like foam and then it's like wrapped around it.
Yeah,
But
true.
like a comfortable couch is like stuffed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good call. And to me, the wear and tear looks like almost like a furniture version of like ripped pants. You know how people like buy new jeans that have like a ton of holes in them.
Yeah.
So maybe that's part of like the aesthetic. But it, I don't know. It more reads to me like they just need to, if they can, afford the two couches in front of them, they just need to throw that sofa away and get like a new sofa. It feels like it's just too old compared to the rest of it. Um,
Hmm.
but anyway, we're really nitpicking that couch.
Yeah. Well, you got the surface shading. Like if you look at the
True.
reflections compared, like that's pretty spot on.
Yeah, it definitely feels like leather from a reflection shader quality. I would agree with
Yeah.
that.
But the
Um,
texture doesn't quite read as leather
yeah.
much.
Let's see. Cool. He says nitpick the mess out of it. All right. So another note I had was that the window itself feels really really thin. Like it's the structure of the wall is not correct. So and I'm only going to know this because I dabble a little bit in renovation, but like a typical wall is going to be 4 inches in the structural 2x4s, or I guess they're metal 2x4s too. And then you've got drywall on top of that, usually like a half inch thick. So that takes it up to 5 inches, plus the casing, the trim around the window, which in your image is the wood casing. That's usually another half inch. So like we're looking at like 6 inches, and your wall is like an inch and a half, 2 inches kind of thing. So the implication there is that like all of the walls are super thin. So that needs to be a little bit, well, a lot thicker to feel like a structural wall. And that was just something I noticed a little bit. That, yeah, I guess when you're doing art viz, you're going to probably learn it just because you're into that stuff anyway, but like kind of understanding more about structure of things will help it feel more realistic and be more realistic and be more accurate. Um,
I
and
didn't
then
notice that at first, but once I saw it on the notes, I couldn't stop seeing like it as like a paper thin enclosure.
sorry, I ruined that kind of stuff
Someone's gonna
for you.
like bust through, like with your leg
Right,
man,
right. It kind
coming
of
through
feels
the
like a
back
movie
wall.
set, because at movie sets, surely they don't build walls correctly. They just do the bare minimum to feel
Yeah.
believable. But that's kind of what it feels like to me. And then a note that I had, I wondered if you would agree, is that everything feels in focus, which you don't want a lot of depth of field at all in this situation. But like as we look outside and we see the bush or the hedge, whatever that is, it's just I can't tell that there's any depth. I can't tell like how far away from the window that thing is, and I feel like with a little bit of like all because all cameras have that, right? Like that, it's not possible to get rid of. They have everything in perfect focus.
Sure.
So I would have maybe added a little bit to that to kind of, if nothing else, to like show depth and take focus away from that bush on the outside. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. Not too much though, because
Yeah,
like in a space that's this small, you'd have to use a fairly wide lens, and
yeah,
there's nothing really close to the camera, so you'd get very, very little,
true.
but it could still be worth adding for sure.
True. But yeah, it's a very minor note, if it even worked out at all. But and then some nitpicking there. We can see some splotchiness on the left side in the shadows. It looks like clearly a denoising artifact, and sometimes that's just a limit on the machine. Not everybody can afford to wait like 24 hours or whatever to render that kind of quality, and it's common with interior. But it breaks a little bit of the illusion. It's not too bad. It's a really small nitpicky note, but it is something I noticed. let's see, was there anything else? Let me look at my notes. Window frame, everything
Yeah, I had a
fits.
couple small tweaks.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Let her rip.
So yeah, sure. The first one was where the footstool is. It just meets the table like exactly at that little point,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no overlap.
Mm-hmm.
So usually we want to avoid that if possible. So just move it slightly to the left or slightly to the right.
What do they call that? Tangents in a
Yeah,
composition? Okay.
visual tangent.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's
That's
a,
true.
not a very large one. It's not distracting, but
Mm-hmm.
good to avoid if possible. And another one was maybe brighten up the trim a little bit that goes around the wall. Because at first, when I looked at the left wall, I didn't see that there was any trim.
Yep.
And having something either make it much more white or a little bit darker
Mm-hmm.
so that it really like blends the difference between the floor and the wall.
Yeah, that's true.
I think that could help.
Yeah, I agree with that. I had to look again after you said it. I was like, wait, where's the trim?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's see what else was there. The lamp, I couldn't tell if there's a light bulb in it or not. It's like it's turned to an angle where it looks like I should be able to see a light bulb,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't. But maybe it's just like really far back in there.
Yeah.
So either rotate it a little bit more so that it's like it won't matter, or pull the light bulb out a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a fair note too. So let me ask you a question about the pristine. What your opinion is, Lampel? I
Oh, sure.
personally, I don't love pristine. I just something's very unnatural, unrelatable about pristine. Now, I don't look at a lot of architectural magazines or anything like that. I see renders all the time, but like I don't see photographs. So like I'm looking at these two sofas and they look fresh out of the factory. Like no one has ever sat on them before. And like that just bothers me. It's not reality to me. So I
Like
would
the
give a
chairs.
note. Yeah, like the two chairs. What did I call them? Sorry, the small chairs on both sides. But what do you think? Like maybe that's just a characteristic of art viz and even photography, like living room photography, whatever you want to call it. Like, what do you think about the pristine stuff? Where I would say like put some wrinkles in there, put some sort of wear on there very subtly, but maybe it needs to be pristine. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could use like a few wrinkles because no matter what it is, it's always going to be pulled or stretched in some direction.
Hmm.
Because even like changing the temperature of the room is going to do that.
Oh, that's
So
true.
even small things,
Big
like
and
even if
deep.
it's brand new, it'll probably still have some stretches.
Right.
I think you had some like larger like waves in the model. It's really hard to tell in here, but when you had your render on your website, that was just the chair that had that, so that was good.
Let's see. I'm
Um,
looking at that right now. Let's
but
see.
yeah, actually, I like the pristine. I think it just needs to be matched with something that's a little bit less.
Hmm.
So, like, if you took the couch and then took the notes that we gave on that and made that more realistic,
Hmm.
I think then the chairs would like it would fit better.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Okay, that's a good note. Um, the last thing I did want to say is I think you did a great job on the rug. At first, like it just felt very believable to me. And I'm looking at it. A lot of times I see in ArcViz, like people overcompensate for the rug and they put like massive wrinkles on the edges just to be like, hey, it's not a flat plane. This is a rug. And it's like a photographer would have flattened that out. You know what I mean? But you've got very, very subtle little wrinkles on the left side and then also on the right. It looks like you just barely curved up the edge. And that is very realistic and believable, in my opinion. Even underneath the table, there's just a very subtle amount of undulation in the surface that, I don't know, reads very, very good to me. So,
It looks great.
yeah, it does look, overall, like, again, the image looks really, really good. And even despite the tangent that Lampel pointed out, I actually think this footstool looks photoreal. I mean, I couldn't
Yeah.
give you any notes about like how to improve that. From the pattern being sewn together, like it just all looks really good.
Yeah. One object that seemed a little bit odd was the pillow on the right side of the couch.
Oh yeah. Are you wondering if
Like
it's
it looks super fuzzy.
yeah, is it fuzzy or is it a pattern? Like if it's a fur pillow, I could say like, well, it doesn't read perfectly. Let me see. I think the next image has it a little
Or maybe
bigger.
it is a pattern.
Yeah, that I got stuck between is it a pattern or is it fur?
Hmm.
Either way, like, yeah, I see what you mean. My eye went there initially. It's a furry
Yeah,
pillow. That's what Tebow said.
it's a what? It's a
It
fur
is a
pillow?
furry pillow.
Oh, okay. So yeah, in that case, like I think the fur on it is pretty awesome. It's just that it's all going in different directions.
Very patchy.
Yeah, so like most of it would be smoothed in some directions, or it'd be like a very large
Hmm.
pattern. Otherwise, you'd have to like take your fingers and like intentionally poke all of these different areas.
Right, right,
And it'd be like really hard to get it to look like that.
right. Oh, so David, you're asking, can we say stuff about the picture too? Yeah, I mean, I think
Go
we're
for it.
all open to other perspectives. Yeah, keep it a communal effort. So if you've got things to say, go for it. Just don't say this sucks. You're terrible. Let's avoid that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's Kent's job.
Yeah, and good job is off limits. That's the worst phrase in the English language,
Good job.
according to that movie Whiplash we were talking
Uh,
about. Cool. All right. Well, I'm waiting if you've got something to say, but maybe we can come back to it. We'll move on. I think that's all I had to say about this particular scene. Oh, here we go. I have the feeling the shadows in the room could be a bit on the dark, be a bit darker compared to the outside of the window. Let's go back and look. I mean, it's such a. Oh, wait. Are you saying that the shadows, like in the bush, for example, are much darker? It's a more contrasted shadow to light versus inside. Is that maybe what I'm picking up? Because I think the lighting actually reads very realistic. A bright day, but I can see what you're saying. Like the shadows in the image and the environment image maybe are too dark.
yeah,
Yeah,
I could
especially
see
the
that.
hallway part. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I don't know
I
how to
really like the
test it.
hallway lighting though. It
I
looks
kind of do
good.
too. I feel like it does feel pretty natural. Like it's a good amount of global illumination. But I could get behind a note that like the contrast on the outside, like mainly with that bush, is a disconnect. But then also, Lampel, maybe you could speak your opinion about this. I would try and blow out the window. Like if I were doing this render, I would try and avoid any detail outside because like when you take a picture, the exposure between the outside and inside, you rarely see both at the same time unless you take
I
like an
feel like
HDR image.
yeah, I feel like he's kind of done that for the most part.
Oh, okay. I would
Like I
blow
think
it
it's
out to almost
already
white, but
yeah, I don't think it would you'd want to go that extreme.
okay.
So I think he did a good job
Okay.
there.
Like between the legs. Okay. So there's some critique, there's some pushback about darker shadows, and yeah, several people are on that boat. So yeah, it might be worth a test. Like Tebow, if you want to follow up, like that'd be kind of cool. If you followed up and darkened shadows or applied some of these notes, that'd be pretty sweet. But cool. Thanks
Mhm.
for participating, team. Let's go on to the next one, which he
This is also Tebow, right?
yes, and actually you had one more image where you blurred the whole render. Do you want to talk about that? The philosophy
Oh
behind that?
yeah, sure. Yeah, go on that one. So one thing that I was thinking about in terms of composition, a really easy way to see whether your picture is balanced or not is to just blur it out until you can't see what the objects are. And then you can kind of try to reorganize it as if it was an abstract. So in this case, it looks like it's a little bit unbalanced to the left and all of the visual weights going over there. So either maybe cropping just a little bit of that left side or like bringing the footstool over to the right or however you want to do it. Just, yeah, I think that'll help balance things out.
I think that's a really cool note. I've never done that before. I don't even think I've heard that technique before, but I
Oh,
totally see
really?
the value in like blurring it big time.
Yeah, the only thing that it doesn't really do is if you have an area of like really high frequency, really contrasty stuff,
Because you
then it'll
lose all
kind of
that.
get rid of that and that'll kind of throw it off a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a really
But
good tip.
for the most part, it's yeah, it'll help
Nice.
you reorganize things.
I like that one a lot. Cool. So you had another one that I initially didn't see on your submission, but this modern-ish kitchen. Um, I mean, another awesome job. Like overall, this is really good work. So we're going to be in the nitpicking mindset. Okay, that's the only notes I really came up with. And let's see. Let me just think. Okay, the big one that I had, and you have two angles. So on this image, you've got a angle looking down the counter. And what kept coming to mind when I looked at this was how sharp everything was. And like I imagined if I'm at the range and I'm turning on the light, on the hood, if I don't hit the button exactly and I touch that edge, like I'm gonna cut myself. Like it's super super sharp, and it looks like that CG kind of sharp, like where polygons are unnaturally razor sharp, and whereas in reality, like if you go look at a cabinet or any kind of sharp edge, it's always got just the slightest little bevel, and I think it's enough to where you would catch a small highlight. Like an example that comes to mind is if you've seen Lampel's pistol normal mapping texturing course. Sorry, there was a pistol texturing course, and he has this GIF of before normal map and after, where it's got super sharp polygon lines, and then the normal map rounds those off, and you get like a little bit of highlight being caught, and it makes a huge difference for the surface quality. So I think that could happen here in general, as a general note across the whole surface from where wall and ceiling connect. It's like it looks like two surfaces either intersecting or a perfect cube. And that just becomes a natural, the popcorn like ceiling. It's not popcorn, it's a more subtle version of a popcorn ceiling, but you can see where that texture ends, and then the perfectly flat cabinets begin, and it's just an unnatural transition. It's basically no transition. And I would say that that's true for the backsplash as well. I think if you like selected your edges and just a subtle bevel, it would drastically change from being like overly sharp and feeling off to like that extra last step, extra inch to get into like photorealistic territory. But that was my biggest note. Let me see what else I had.
One thing I didn't think about until you started talking about the range and like the stuff in it, I don't see a dishwasher. Do they have a dishwasher? I mean, it could just be on the other side of the room.
True.
But I was trying to think of like things that seem like they're missing.
Well, it's a range and a dishwasher.
Wait, but then I thought it was an oven.
I'm just kidding.
Okay.
It's not a thing. Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe it's somewhere else, but yeah, practically that would be, if I was looking at this apartment trying to rent it or a house, I would be like, nah, we can't do it without a dishwasher. But yeah, I'm curious.
That was that. And there's only like one plug on the side of the wall, and it works for a render, but I was thinking like if that was an actual house, I would hate that.
I see what you mean. In the kitchen, you need a bunch.
That'd be the absolute worst, yeah.
So
and you'd have to like drag the cord over the hot stove in order to get it over like to where the sink is.
Man, we're having some fun nitpicking. All right.
Very nitpicky.
Very nitpicky. Basically, you need to become a remodeler also in order to make these renders make perfect sense. But I mean, these are valid points. Like the more you stare at an image, like the more you start to see what breaks. I think most people recognize those things subconsciously, and like something like if I showed this to my wife, I don't think she would think without a doubt it's a photograph. And I think subconsciously she kind of realizes some of these things, whether it's not a dishwasher or the lines seem too sharp. I don't know. I think that would be the truth about this kind of image, but it's very, very close to being photoreal. Another note that I had was the gold hardware. There's arguably an argument against this, but we actually, when we renovated our kitchen, we did gold hardware too, and we rarely found anything that gold. Like that looks like yellow gold. It looks unnatural gold kind of thing. Whereas gold hardware and even, well, I'm trying to think. Gold has a variety, but like I would tone that down and make it a little more subtle. It looks too, I don't know, like Saddam Hussein's palace. Like, do you remember? Did you ever see pictures of that where everything's like super gold? Maybe that's the aesthetic you're going for, with that hardware. But to me, or Donald Trump's like apartment, that's a better example, perhaps.
Sure, it looks fine on like the handles.
It doesn't stick out quite so much on the handles.
You could think like, okay, maybe it's like a different material, maybe it's not quite gold. But yeah, on the sink, it feels like a bit much.
Yeah. So yeah. So I mean, maybe that is the aesthetic. Maybe it's a subjective note, depending on what you're going for. And one last thing that I did have was the lights on the range hood up here. I can't figure out where the source is for that because, we arguably if it was coming from this light, this can light, then the wall would also have a very sharp streak. But then you've got another, it's like two lights kind of angling like this. And I don't see any light source for the one on the right. Now, it's a cool illumination effect, but I just don't know where the light's coming from. So that is just has intrigued me, like, what's going on there? But I don't know what that was about. It seemed like an artifact or something. But anyway, if you've got a explanation for it, I'd be interested in it. Otherwise, like, I think that was kind of it. Oh yeah, okay. If you look, now that I'm looking at my list, there's actually no light fixtures underneath the cabinet. So like at this particular angle, when we can see under the cabinets, like the light's just coming from nowhere. So, you know, a little extra detail. If you're gonna show that side of the cabinet, like finish it off with the models themselves. That'd be a big help.
Yeah, my only other note on that was like the table in the first image is kind of out of place. It's just a tiny corner of it over on the side. So either like bring it out a little bit more, maybe have that edge kind of sort of line up where the sink is and have a bit more of the table surface, and you maybe put some stuff on there, or just put it out of the frame completely. Because yeah, when it just kind of like peeks in like that, it feels odd. I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, I think that's a good note. It kind of draws my eye away from the kitchen, but then there's not really much payoff for my eye to go there.
Yeah, there's nothing. Yeah, exactly.
So looking at these images and the fact that you brought up pristine, I hope like some of the sharpness of the edges would take away. It's not really not making it pristine, but it's not making it unnaturally like perfect, if that makes sense. But also I almost put this note down there, but I didn't know for sure because I haven't done a ton of ArcViz. But like, I know from doing renovations that no wall, no corner is ever 90 degrees or is ever perfectly flat. So I would be tempted to like always just slightly move some vertices on the wall so that it's not a perfectly planar surface. What do you like? Would you ever do that? Do you think that would be just not noticeable? But I feel like at best you would get a variety in the gradients in your lighting. Like it would just slightly change it. But I wonder if that's a valid point. Because I know for a fact that none of these walls are 90 degrees and flat.
Yeah.
Anyway, that may be super nitpicky, but
I think you're like, to note something good, like your shading and texturing on the range hood and on the actual oven itself, that looks pretty photoreal.
Yeah, totally. There's a lot of good to be said about this. This is a small one, but the glow of your can lights, I think, is a perfect balance. That's not overexposed and like, you know, crazy lens flares or anything, but it's just that right amount that, I don't know, it's very pleasing to me. Those can get out of hand quickly, but I think you really nailed it.
Yeah.
And then, gosh, some other things that I really like. I think the texture wood floor looks really, really good. Very believable. Having the light bounce off the floor onto those cabinets, that little like triangular shape right in here. It's hard for me to describe, but sometimes I see a lot of pleasing things in transition from illuminated to shadow. Like it seems like there's just a slight reddish like tint to that transition. I mean, I'm getting like really, really fine, but when I see that in images, it just feels good. I don't know if that makes any sense or if you can relate at all, Lampel.
I hadn't really thought about it, but I know what you're talking about, and that makes a ton of sense.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, very, very fine. But like that whole little section down here feels super believable to me. But yeah, I mean, awesome work.
Super close.
Awesome work. I think anybody in here saw these things and were like, wow, these are really good renders. So awesome work. And thanks for receiving
I love
feedback.
the texture choice on the cabinets of like that pattern.
True.
I think it's an interesting choice. It works.
Yeah, I like it. Seems like you've got a design bone in your body too.
Yeah, maybe just add a couple more objects as well.
Cool.
Just to fill things out, like a soap dispenser or
true.
Things like that.
Very true. Awesome. Okay, that's did we miss anything? No, I think we covered all the notes. Awesome. The next one is from Ataru, which I believe you're here as well, which is cool. It's always great to have ideal to have the artists themselves in here as we critique. So it's another
Awesome.
ArcViz, another kitchen render. And it's also another good kitchen render. I think when I first saw this one, like the first impression is kind of like, where do we place this? Is this person a beginner? Is this artist a mid-level, high level? Like, I would say that you are on your way, like, to high level, if not already there. Like, that's the impression that I got from it. So it's going to be, in my opinion, more like a nitpicking critiques. Really trying to push it that extra inch or so over the top. And with that said, on the left image, I feel like my initial thought was it's over. There's too much treatment. Like, compositing is not the right word, but like, adding, if there's a vignette or if you adjusted the levels in Photoshop or something, I think it's a little too far, because if we go to the next page, I color picked what seemed like one of the brightest sections, which was up here at the top of the cabinets where it's most illuminated, and the color is right here. And so it's kind of like a 75-80% like bluish color, which, with bright areas, you kind of want that to be white, generally. Is that fair to say? Like the brightest areas of an image, you tend to want to be white, like take the full spectrum from white to black kind of thing?
Sure. I mean, not exactly white, but like really close.
Yeah.
Especially if you have something like a white reflective surface, like
Right.
you have on the countertops and
Yeah.
on the wood there. So
Totally.
yeah.
Let's see. I guess we can stay here on these notes, but this was another example where I think the edges could be too sharp. I feel like it's kind of a common thing for people to do with ArcViz, thinking that they can get away with perfectly sharp, like single polygon walls and ceilings and like not put enough bevels in there. But I think the cabinets would go a long way to have those bevels. For example, like in let's say right here in the on the bottom right is what I'm looking at, Lampel, like the drawers that would be pulled out. Like, there's no
Oh, I see.
indication of depth there, like that this is a drawer inside the cabinets. Like, maybe you can slightly pull the drawers out. I'm talking like just a fraction of an inch, like offset them to get that level of imperfection. But also, if you put the bevel there on both of those edges, like it would catch highlights and you would see a better distinction. Because I don't really know, like, why is that? How do I know that that's not just like a texture rectangle, like encircling that intrusion, the polygon like extrusion inward? The bevels would go really, really far, I think, on this kind of ArcViz. Am I beating that
Yeah.
too hard? Do you think I'm beating that note to death?
No, I feel like that's fair. I mean, especially since a lot of the other places he has a lot of those bevels already.
Mm-hmm.
Like my first impression of the sink and of the oven
Mm-hmm.
are that they're actually really soft.
Yeah, totally.
Um, and it almost seemed too soft, but I wasn't sure about that. Do you think those
Mm.
areas look?
I'm looking at the oven right now, and I think
It
it's
felt a little like
believable.
plastic toy-ish,
So
like somehow.
I think that I'm feeling the same note as you, but I put it on the shader more than I put it on the model.
Okay.
But it's interesting that we're maybe feeling a similar note, but on different aspects. Because I don't think the bevels are too broad necessarily, but I feel like the shader, the glossiness, one of the notes I had was the glossy roughness is too high. Like, I would dial it back down. Whereas the kettle, for example, has a better value there. And then the reflections on the oven
I
itself,
see.
almost like maybe if you imagine the glossy shader, you can add a color to it. And when I'm doing anything chrome or like pure reflections, whether it's rough or if it's like, clear reflections, I always make the color white. Wait, I think I'm confusing myself. Maybe, okay, I think what I'm trying to say is, like, it looks like you mixed a diffuse that has a color and the reflections on top of it, whereas it should just be reflections, in my opinion. It should just be the glossy shader, not the diffuse element. Is that making sense?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, now it's just super easy to just put the principled shader up there and turn it to
True.
metallic and
Very true. Good point.
call it about good. But yeah, I
Um,
think in terms of roughness as well, I think that would help a lot because even just like you said, bringing it down, but it's also the exact same roughness everywhere.
yeah.
And so even if it is pristine, like if you cleaned it everything, like it's still gonna have some variation.
Yeah,
So I think it all, yeah,
that's so true.
that'll
These little
help.
subtle textures to break up reflections go so far, so far. With that note, and I'm also going to go back. Atari, you said you put a bevel on there, and looking at this image, I can see the bevel. I can see the evidence of it catching the highlight.
Yeah, in the bottom like left,
Yeah, exactly.
right there.
So I think you're right. You said maybe it was too small, and I think that maybe is the right note. That it's noticeable when you get really, really close to it, but not at any kind of distance. So yeah, maybe increase that bevel width.
Well, I liked your note of like pulling the drawer out just a tad to like accent that a little bit. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, again, it comes from renovation being frustrated because none of them shut perfectly well. So I know that it's pretty realistic. Okay, with your note about like we were talking about breaking up reflections and stuff like that, I would also say you can like when you have perfectly painted things like the cabinetry here, like there's usually a texture even when you spray paint. There's just you can add a subtle like noise texture that would break up the surface, and that would go a long way in my opinion. It would just feel painted, not this unnaturally flat surface that's reflecting perfectly. I would
Yeah.
add something like that. Ironically, do you have something?
Oh, I was gonna say, how do you feel about the brick texture compared to like the cleanliness of everything else?
I was gonna
We can
say,
go there.
ironically, the biggest note I had when I first saw this was the backsplash, and right. So I think you're kind of going after it. It feels a little dirty, like the grout has some like brown spots and stuff.
Hmm.
It does feel a little unclean. And on top of that note, I would say that it feels like an obvious texture, and there's seemingly no bump. It doesn't even look like really much reflection. If maybe you were going for like a matte, like stone type tile, but regardless, like it's very clear whenever we see the transition or really lack of transition between the cabinets and the tile. Like if you really wanted to make it correct, when you add that tile, like you have to cut it, and there's going to be a grout line outlining the transition from cabinet to tile. And so for them
Hmm.
to not have a grout line and they just go into each other, no transition, it's very obvious, like a CG, kind of
Do they ever
technique.
put the cabinet on top of that? So the cabinet would be what has the bevel.
I'm trying to think what you mean.
So it's like they put up the whole thing over the entire wall and then put the cabinet on.
Oh,
Do they ever, or would it actually be cut out to the exact?
so the reason I don't know that anyone would do that because no one wants to pay for tile that's going to be hidden.
Okay, that's
Um,
makes sense.
but because like it gets expensive. So I've never seen that, and I wouldn't. Usually, you calculate it down to the least amount of material you need to buy, because then you'd also think like there's thickness to the tile, and if they stop it just after the cabinets, there's going to be a gap
Mhm.
between the wall and the cabinets unless they tile literally all the way up to the top of the cabinet. Anyway,
Yeah, makes
um,
sense. Well, I mean, that brings in the point that like you can adjust because the cabinets are almost lining up with the grout lines, but not quite. And so if they were to actually put in those cabinets, they would make sure that it's exactly that distance apart,
that I
right?
see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. That's a good point too. You like in a renovation situation, like we didn't move our cabinets and we didn't measure our tile to be perfect, so you do get some pretty small slivers.
Okay.
But yeah, sometimes you have to decide like, is it worth a small sliver or is it worth it just to have a bigger grout line? Anyway, I'm
But
getting
either
really
way,
deep
there's a
into it.
grout line.
Do what? Say
Was
that
the
again.
point. But either way, there's a grout line, is the
Yeah,
point.
right, right. But so I'm reading now, Atari, the texture for the tile was actually more red, and you tried to make it white in Photoshop. So maybe it's not intended to be dirt; it's just an artifact from being left over.
Mm.
Yeah, okay. So maybe it's just reading red because you could have desaturated it and then like have no red in there. But anyway, honestly, like I would whether it's a bump map or like a displacement, I would love to see geometric evidence for those tiles, not because it is pretty noticeable, like in a real kitchen, the grout is indented and the tile. Also, the tiles are not always perfectly at the right depth. like you push it into grout and some go in further than others, just real slight bits. And that changes how the reflection or, lighting affects it. Wow, I'm getting super detailed about some of this stuff. Let me see if that's all. I
Oh,
mentioned.
I had one other
Oh, go ahead.
question for you because I wasn't quite sure. The more I looked at this, the less sure I was.
Uh-huh.
But the reflections in the cabinets, are those
Oh,
too strong? Or
let me see.
because like I tried to look up pictures of like
Right.
reflective cabinets and then like I went upstairs to my kitchen, but we didn't have that, so I like took like a glass and like held it up to the like I couldn't figure out
Right.
what
I see
looks
what you
off
mean.
about this.
I it didn't initially strike me as odd, but it kind of I'm looking at both images, and on the right side there's not an environment to reflect. It's just reflecting the wall, and it doesn't look too strong there. But on the left side, when it is reflecting what's outside, it's such a clear reflection that it kind of looks it looks no different if there was glass and you like taped a picture of plants on the other side of the glass, right? Like it's that clear. And to your point, I do think maybe whether it's realistic or artistic taste, I would tone that down to make sure that we could see what's inside the cabinets so that it looks like glass and not a sheet of chrome. And it's only on, it's
Okay.
specifically, I'm looking right here. This is where the reflections read most strong to me, strongest. I mean, that's not a bad note. I think it's something, again, like I tend to, if there's a reason to make it not perfect, that is my first option because I feel like imperfection equals reality. And so I would put a super subtle, either noise texture, like, I mean, super, super subtle. And because like a very subtle noise, broad noise texture can make a perfectly flat reflection like just slightly wobbly. And I mean, that's just reality, especially in old houses. Like a lot of them are like hand blown glass, and that's not what I'm talking about. Wouldn't go that strong, but like you can see like this kind of Voronoi texture in that kind of glass. So nowadays we have much flatter glass, but if it looks too perfect, I would say mess it up.
It's a good note. Yeah.
Let's see, the cabinets on the left side need less reflections as the inside the cabinets are being directly hit by the light. I think that's a good note. So the reflection there is perfectly fine. Oh, the cabinets inside are in shadow. So yeah, I think Elena or Ellen's anima, you're making an argument that the evidence is maybe it is the right reflection. I still think maybe some artistic license. I think something feels off about the reflection, whether it's scientifically true or just artistically preferred. I don't know. Anyway, overall, like taking a step back, like really, really good work on this. I love the floor.
Yeah.
I
It
love the
looks
texture of the floor. That feels very believable as a wood floor, modern wood floor.
yeah, I love the stove and the little like rag sitting on the dishwasher
Mm-hmm.
and the faucet looks awesome.
Oh, I didn't even notice the rag. Wow, yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
I think I'm drawn to it because it's like imperfect and it looks like someone used it. It's not just like perfectly flat going down. Cool. Well, good stuff with the ArcViz today. Like really, really good examples. So thanks for submitting those. Hope they were helpful notes. We'll go on to the next one. All right, so this one is the Hidden Base by Asif Hamid. Maybe is how you pronounce that. I feel like you were in here too. I hope you are. I'll scroll down real quick. Yeah, okay. It looks like you are in here. Awesome. So thanks for submitting this. We'll read. I didn't read the context of the previous one, so I apologize. Let's read. Let's read Asif's. Well, real quick, going back, Ataru, you did say you were looking to make something photorealistic. So, yeah, I think maybe our notes were applicable in that sense. Awesome. So the hidden base. Let's see. Let's see. I've been working on a level I imagine for an adventure game. I would be glad to hear your comments and critiques about it. I tried to create a kind of underground base connected to a cave. The ambience is supposed to be dark and mysterious. I was looking for photorealistic result, but I easily found photorealistic textures that gave great looking walls and floor. So I have a mix now of realistic parts and then basic materials for liquids, lights, and computers. And you said I think you've got a yeah, so you've got a project here with a bunch of different images that we can look at and reference. But cool. All right, so an adventure game. I'm glad that that's what you were after, because I immediately got a N64 GoldenEye feeling whenever I saw this environment, like whatever the
It
first
does
level
feel
is
like
when
a
you're
game.
underground. So in that sense, yeah, I'm glad you were going for that, and that aesthetic is clearly coming off. Let's see. I've started all these. I feel like I'm talking a lot. Do you want to start this one, Lampel?
Oh, sure. Well, so I guess first we can do the technical things, and then we can go into the more artistic things. Because he said that he wants it to be, what was the word? Dark and mysterious.
Yeah.
And I don't feel it's quite there, but that's more of like an abstract thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing that jumps out technically is the walls and the floor and the ceiling are all the same texture.
Yeah.
And even though they're all concrete, they should still be like made differently. And so you'd get different references. So I think a couple slides down, I have a picture of like a rounded underground like concrete bunker. And you can kind of see how like the walls and the like arches and floor all have slightly different textures.
Wait a minute. Did you put that in the? Oh, I probably need to refresh. Hold on a second.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Let's try that again. One second. And we are back. Okay, I'm looking at that image.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, so they're all slightly different. And also there's, you can see there's still a type of trim around the outside where like more of the foundation is. And there's just a little bit more detail that you could add to the texture itself that would help, I don't know, break up the monotony there.
Yeah.
I think that's like the biggest note in terms of texturing.
That's a really good point. I'm glad you found this image, because if I was just creating this from memory, I'm not sure I would know to do what is in this image, which as I understand it, like to construct it, you can't pour a massive tunnel, right? Like just with a bunch of concrete. You would need
Right.
several different like molds, like to like put bits of concrete at a time to create that pattern. And it adds so much reason and like believable variation. Whereas if I was creating it from memory, I'd be like, yeah, sure, slap a photo of concrete on there, and that should be enough. But yeah, to your point, I mean, just looking up reference, I think that's a really valid example.
Yeah, and check out more reference as well. Like I don't know how like clean you want it to be, but a lot of concrete stuff, has like the leaks running down or whatever
Yeah,
and all that
totally.
good stuff.
Yeah, that's a concrete is a great reason to like make it dirty and kind of gross, especially underground. Like nothing's gonna be clean down there, surely. Let's see. So yeah, I had that
Unless they
note
have
too. Oh,
unless
go
they have
ahead.
gold faucets, gold sinks.
Concrete bunker with gold sinks. I also had the note that the concrete is very generic. It's very tileable, too perfect, and too clean. I would say that I got this. Like in general, I feel like there could be a lot more detail to what's going on down there, and and you mentioned like an adventure game, and I don't know. Could you confirm or deny if you're in here? Like, were you going for that sort of adventure game, like 90s kind of video game kind of stuff? That's what a lot of this feels like. Whereas, so that's kind of the feeling I've had. But there was a disconnect in that, like, the lighting is cycles and very realistic. So I feel like you're stuck. I made this note, stuck between a 90s game environment and architectural visualization. That is a weird place to be in. I don't think he's here anymore. Or they're here anymore. Asif. Oh, maybe you are 5 minutes ago. I'm kind of losing my train of thought. What was I going to talk about? Oh, the computer scene. Let me go there. The hidden base and the computer. Right. So, like, you mentioned that it's not quite finished, and this is a work in progress. But in the computer room, like, you got to. I'm thinking of reasons why there would be an underground bunker. Probably a lot of important stuff is happening down there, something to protect, if there's a computer room, it's going to be super complex, and you've got that complexity in this crazy screen array going on at the front, but then the computers are like, there's no cords, there's no plugs in the walls, like there's no power sources, or there can be so many bits of detail going on here. I think, fill up the whole floor with desks kind of thing. It's just too simple. It's too simplified in a lot of cases. Another thing is the scale. There's something that feels pretty off about the scale. Like if we look at the tile on this picture with shelving and like these bottles of blue and green liquid, the grout in there is going to be, if I judge this shelf to be about the size up to my like chest or neck, which is what it feels like, the grout lines are like, 1.5 inches thick. So it feels like that tile should be a lot smaller, or the tile size is fine, but the grout should be a lot smaller. And then also that room with the barrels beside the table with the liquids, the barrels feel too big. The ceiling feels a little too like low. The bottles feel large. Like I'm really having a hard time imagining what size I am in that room, what size a human is, or what size anything really is. And I think that then you have another image of just the table with the liquids, and yeah, I just can't get a good sense of scale.
Yeah, one thing that you could do that I like doing is if you have like the Rigify add-on, just add in that guy as a rig and then base everything that you make off of that.
Yeah.
And then see, okay, like maybe the ceiling needs to go up just a little bit or whatever.
Yeah.
And that way you can get a consistent sense of scale.
Yeah.
But also if the ceiling's that low, because I imagine in a bunker it's probably pretty low.
True.
But if they're being that like conservative with space, everything else seems extremely spacious and empty.
Yeah.
So maybe making everything a little bit more compact and a little claustrophobic might help.
Yeah. That's a good point too. I'm glad you brought up put a human character in there. When I started doing environments, kind of early on, it never felt right, no matter how much I measured and put things correctly, until I put a human in there, and all of a sudden it's like now I have an accurate thing to judge against. So yeah, if you're not doing that, I would highly recommend getting in that habit for environment stuff. That's a great note. Let's see. You said something. I see. I just couldn't manage to model so many details. So yeah, maybe you're early on in the process, and so you have these plans to add all these details and things like that. So yeah, I definitely want to be aware of like this being a work in progress and not finished. But as you go, if those are your plans, definitely increase the details and stuff.
Yeah, and I know you're just starting out as well. Like I saw some of your other work in progress. So I mean, even doing an entire bunker is quite big. So definitely props for giving that a shot and like doing all those bottle models and
yeah, true,
all the computers and all that. Like it's a lot of work.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, to that point, like now that you've blocked out like a lot of this bunker, maybe spend several months just focused on the computer room, right? Like really fill that thing out. Because also what I did when I was early on is I envisioned this big, I wanted to make a Matrix movie. And so like I planned this whole big thing out, and obviously I'm not going to be able to do that being early on. I can't even do that now, like make a whole movie about a short film about it myself. Hey buddy, can you hear my kid jumping? Hey buddy, can you go to the living room for me? Can you go to the living room for me? Do you have anything to say? I might have to take care of this real quick.
Oh, yeah, I can keep going.
Maybe we can go on to the next one, but
sure.
Okay. Cool.
But yeah, I was just gonna say the exact same thing of just like pick one of the scenes that you like the most and just focus on that for a while. And maybe you could try to incorporate the barrels and some of the other work that you've already done into that room, and sort of just combine it all into one.
Yeah. Elena had a really good point in the chat. Maybe add some aeration grid to highlight it's an underground space. Absolutely, you should do that.
Nice.
It's a really good point.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, yeah, keep going, Asif. Like you've really got a good start to this thing. So, yeah, I'd love to see you progress, and please post that progress as you do it. It really took me back to a very good place in my nostalgia for that adventure game type 007 thing. But
Absolutely.
all right, let's go to the next one.
Last one.
Yeah, this is the last one, the Pokédex. And I should say, I thought this was really funny because when Lampel jumped on with me, he was like, "Is this a real device?" And I had to take a moment to, like, wait a minute, do you not know Pokemon? And
I've barely played Pokemon.
right, and so I was caught. I was like, well, they've made like Raspberry Pi projects based on the Pokédex or made toy versions. So yeah, it's a real thing. But no, this is obviously from Pokemon. I would think to most people, but I thought that was really funny, Lampel.
Well, I thought like there was, I don't know. I figured there was something real, like they would have like made it as like an actual game thing. I don't know.
Well, yeah, like a kind of a toy. I think I've seen that stuff, like a where it'll have like pre-made, Pokemon entries that kids can play with. In that sense, it's real.
Yeah.
Or were you asking like, were they trying to model the toy or trying to model, like, make the fake Pokédex from Pokemon into a real thing via a render? Is that what you're asking?
That I don't know.
Okay.
I honestly I didn't know what it was.
Okay.
I had to look it up.
Gotcha. That's
I
awesome.
played the old like N64 like Pokemon Stadium,
Oh.
but I even when I had a Game Boy, I didn't play through the actual games.
Oh man. Okay. Well, that would explain it. You missed out, man. You gotta get it like an emulator and play that thing.
Apparently. Okay. Okay.
Beyond classic. So anyway, yeah, we're talking about a Pokédex by Panboy. Let's see. Let's see some notes right off the bat. Wait, I think I asked for a little bit more clarification. Let me see real quick. Okay, you've been learning Blender for a while now, though I don't often post work. It seems like a great way to get feedback. In the past few days, I put this scene together. I modeled everything but the chairs. I'm using textures from Polygon. I hope they provides a photoreal effect. Okay, that was the information I think I was mostly looking for. And also, you put it together in a few days. That's pretty cool.
Nice.
Yeah. So going for photorealism, I think it's there's definitely some room to improve to get there. And one of the notes that maybe sticks out right away is that even though you're using textures from Polygon, and I know that those are really high quality textures, it's when used kind of the wrong way, it breaks the effect and it looks very CG. It doesn't look photoreal. And on the coffee table, I think is a good example of that, where it's very clearly a normal map, which normal maps are purely a CG fakery thing, and they are great when you can't notice it, but right in front of the camera being this bumped, like it's very obvious that it's a normal map or normal or bump map, and
Mhm.
and so that's it leaves a lot to be desired there in terms of realism for that coffee table. And I'm trying to describe it in better detail. I think it feels like the coffee table is way too bumpy. Like most coffee tables are pretty smooth. They do have there are rustic type coffee tables that look like a Viking made it. And if you were going for that, then I would say like this wasn't the right wood to choose for it. But like the normal
Well,
map seems
actually,
like it's a real rustic, deep type of raw wood. Um, and if it was, then it should be modeled. It shouldn't be textured that way. It should actually be geometry. But anyway, I'm a little confused as to like what type of coffee table you were going for. Um,
yeah,
anyway,
because now that you mention it, it's like made out of wooden planks,
it feels
and
like a kind of
usually
like a
coffee
wood
tables
floor a
like
little bit.
one large slab of wood.
Right, right. And like my coffee table out in my living room is several planks of wood, kind of like this, but it's super flat, and you don't see any grain detail. You don't see any slats. It's just sanded perfectly smooth. So
Mm.
I don't know. I've never seen a coffee table necessarily like this. Because like if you put like a cup, for example, on this coffee table, it's going to hit this big divot in the table, and you're going to like potentially spill it. So it doesn't make a lot of practical sense. It ends up being a little confusing. And so you were going for more of a rustic feel. I would say that if you were going for more rustic, in my impression of rustic aesthetic is that it's a darker wood. It doesn't have any shine to it. It's very, very raw, and diffuse. So maybe those are some notes like darken the wood, take away the glossy element, and make it very rough.
Yeah, and probably just also use higher resolution.
That's a good point too. Yeah, because he provides super high res images, and you can definitely see that the resolution's working against you in this situation. Let's see. Beyond the table, in the Pokédex itself, it like I believe, as far as I know, if my Pokemon lore is a little rusty, but I believe that this is like a electronic display, and right now it feels like paper. Like you cut out a printed picture of the Pokemon and like pasted it on there. Like it needs to be glowing like an LCD screen. Something needs to be happening to make it look electronic. Right now, there's nothing for that. And then also on the right side where it says Limbrion, I don't know that Pokemon exactly, but that's where I think the Pokemon like when you scan for a new Pokemon or whatever, like that changes. So that means that's a dynamic display as well, and that one probably needs to be glowing. So there are some emissive elements to obviously make that an electronic device that are missing currently. Panboy says it's a 3K texture. I mean, that should be plenty, but it also depends. Like if it's a 3K texture, let me turn on
Also
my
really close to it. Yeah.
right. Is it a very small section of that 3K texture or what? Because it's definitely not reading like 3K, because that should probably be enough based on this render size. So that's curious. Well, another note is there's, I think, some fairly clear normal issues, like geometry normal issues on the couches. So you can see it very clearly. Where's my little pointer? Right here on the, can you see those, Lampel? Do you see like where the faces are illuminated
Oh,
very differently at the edges,
mhm.
at the connections of faces?
It
So
looks like it's like flat shaded or
yeah,
something.
it kind of looks like it's either like it's inverted normals sort of a feeling,
Mhm.
or like some faces are smooth and some are not. And
Yeah,
so
one
I
of those
would
two.
maybe select everything in edit mode and then hit Control N, or just select everything and go to smooth, like hit the smooth shading. But yeah, it's pretty obvious on the right to me. That was the first time I really noticed it, where you see bounce lighting coming off of the blue rug onto the like armrest side of the chair, but then like under the seat cushion there is no blue that's bleeding onto that part. So that really threw me off initially, but I think it's because of a normal issue. So that's a big like technical error that's breaking the photorealism. Done that so many. It's easy to overlook, especially I think you said you didn't model. Let me look back. I think you said you did not model everything but the chairs. So yeah, when you download models elsewhere, like you got to be mindful of like what did they do with the normals? There's no telling. So definitely be aware of like errors like that coming in from imported models. Let's
For
see,
sure.
anything else. There's some, I would say, so this is going back to like everything being in focus. I had that note earlier for Tebow's ArcViz render, but it made less sense in an ArcViz render. Here, for basically a product rendering, like focusing on close-up objects, like you definitely need to have some depth of field, because that's more prominent when you're zoomed in really, or when you're physically close to objects. Um, would you
For
say that's
sure.
way more applicable here, Lampel?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's
That's where you get
see.
it the most.
Right. That would, I think, help a lot with the photorealism as well. Let's see if I had anything else.
Well, you had the note on like possible normal issues
Mm-hmm.
and as well as the couch. It seems like there's something going on the top of the ball in
Oh,
front.
yeah. I can see
I don't
that right
know
here.
what ball that is. I couldn't name it,
I couldn't
but
name if that's the Master Ball or Ultimate Ball. I forget what they're called, but yeah.
yeah, there's some sort of
You're talking
like
about the black one, right?
yeah, stretching or something at the very
Yeah.
top.
I think it's like a UV sphere where you have like a bunch of edges like coming into triangles, like that extreme pole junction. I
Yeah,
think that's what's happening there.
and it's like subdivided. Yeah,
Yeah. Good catch. That's a
yeah.
modeler
So if you
for you.
take that and you delete that pole, and then you take the edge loop around it, and then do a grid fill,
Mm-hmm.
and then kind of round that out, you
That
should fix it.
yeah. Yeah, that's the way to fix it. It actually does get pretty difficult, I think, to get it perfectly round because you have to either
Yes.
have the star junction in the middle with, tons of edges coming out from it, or you have
Mhm.
four poles, right? Like on each corner of the round thing. So
Oh, yeah, that's true.
it's tricky to get it perfect. But what I tend to do is like you can, since it's a sphere, take another sphere, subdivide it, and then take your Pokeball sphere, make that really high resolution too. After you do the grid fill, and then do the shrink wrap. And so that's usually the best way that I get like a perfect sphere without a star junction.
Yeah. And
But
you can also do it without the shrink wrap, I believe. There's a function that's just called like two sphere or something,
oh,
and
you're
it'll take
right.
anything and just make it a sphere.
You're right. I've not. That's a yeah. I've not used that tool, but I have. I do. I've seen it before. You're right. Yeah, that'd be a lot faster. So long as it doesn't. The only thing about that is like if you have all these details, like the ball and the different what do you call them? It looks like little extrusions and stuff to create the design. If you do
Hmm.
to sphere, will it take all of those details and just like make it into a sphere shape, or can you limit
Oh,
it to like
yeah,
selection or
probably would.
something? If you do the shrink wrap, you can make a vertex group to just shrink the top. But anyway, that could be like its own little, I don't know, 10-minute video or whatever.
Yeah.
Would the subsurfed cube technique work? Yeah, Tebow, that's essentially what we're talking about. The grid fill will create essentially that subsurfed cube type topology. So that would work as well. But I mean, the reason I think you use the UV sphere is because you have all these concentric loops that are perfect for assigning those gold shaders and red shaders to the geometry. I would assume that's why you went after it. But anyway, I think that's kind of all we had as far
I
as
think
those
my only
notes.
other note for this is like it looks very much like a plastic toy that like I couldn't tell like maybe it's supposed to look like that. Is why I asked like what it was.
True.
Um,
Oh, I see
but
what you
yeah,
mean.
if it's something that like you're out in the wild and you're like trying to look up stuff, it looks very flimsy and
Mm-hmm.
like cheap plastic.
Yeah.
So I don't know what you'd recommend there. Maybe making it some areas a little bit thicker and not having as much like it seems like there's some sort of translucency or
Mm-hmm.
subsurface going on.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think all of it being the exact same material is problem number one because cheap toys like
Hmm.
they do that kind of thing. They use the same plastic for everything, and there's no color variation. It's just kind of cheap design. So like when I look at this and I don't know exactly what to say other than similar notes where we're like it's too perfect, so make it imperfect. Now, how do I know how to get to imperfect? I would look at cell phone designs, right? Because a lot of those are made of plastic or materials that feel like high quality, like well built. And so I would
Yeah.
like maybe add some elements that are metallic looking and maybe other elements that are plastic. But I would reference high end technology like cell phones to like inform that because that'd be pretty cool. I've only seen Pokédexes look like toys, so it'd be neat to see like what if this was like a $400 device and like what would that look like?
I think that'd be super cool
Mm-hmm.
too, because you'd have to get a little bit creative, especially with like the buttons
Yeah.
and trying to like, yeah, because at the moment they don't quite look like they're buttons.
Mm-hmm.
One note on that is usually there's going to be like a crease or like a crevice
Mm-hmm.
outside the button that you can tell, okay, this pushes in,
Yeah, totally.
and that might help.
Yeah, that's a great point too. There's actually I mean, that would be a pretty big challenge to like convert this into like a real
That's
technology.
true. It'd be a
But
lot
that
of
would be
work.
pretty. That'd be a pretty neat thing if you wanted to do that. Um, yeah, I would love to see that. Good stuff. But again, you put that together in a few days. Like that's pretty impressive. So good job.
Keep it up.
The pursuit of photorealism is a long one, and I've been doing this for I think coming up on like 12, 13 years or something, and like I'm still not there fully. So just be patient and learn these tricks and stuff along the way. But cool. I think that's all that I've got. That's another four, and then next week we're going to be looking at Aaron, your Switch, Nintendo Switch, and then Omar, your ArcViz, which it's really good. I'll just say real quick that I love your simulated cloth drapes. That's really high quality.
Oh yeah.
And what else are we looking for? The Sword from Deckstar 77. And one more. Let's see what that one will be. I think it'll be one more because we got to like divide the rest of the submissions by 2 weeks.
Oh yeah,
And it looks like this PlayStation controller. So
sounds good. Are you on vacation next week, or when's your week?
Yes, you're absolutely
I
right.
forgot
So
about
I
that.
am on vacation next week. And have you talked to Jonathan Williamson about potentially co-hosting that with you?
I have not.
Okay, that's
I
fine.
should
I
message
mean,
him.
if not, like, we do think for critique, it's best to have like two hosts. So like, I can get his perspective, you can get mine. Yeah, it's better than just the one perspective. But
Yeah, I'll try to get Jonathan or
okay,
Wes or somebody.
yeah, Wes would be good too. But cool, yeah. So I will be out next week. Lampel will be with you, and then I'll be back for the last critique of the month. So thanks for submitting. Thanks for being here, and a lot of lively, good conversation, good notes being given back and forth. So keep up the good work, and we will see you next week.
Absolutely. I guess one comment
Yeah.
that Panboy said, I know I'm not on the same level as the other guys and I'm working on it. Like that's 100% awesome. Like
Oh yeah.
that's totally fine. Don't feel like intimidated by other people's
Oh yeah.
submissions. They're like
You
where
should
they're at.
only you should only be encouraged. Like I don't know exactly how long you've been doing this stuff, but I mean like I don't know. It's way better than what I did when I started off. Basically, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, everybody starts the same. So keep up the great work. Awesome. All right. Well, with that said, we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Goodbye.